company coming up shortly. First off, though, we're going to take a look, and we do indeed take a long look always into the trickle-down effect that a CEO has on his or her company, whether this is when it comes to culture, ethics, or indeed innovation. A new report out, though, by Hootsuite and LinkedIn has found companies with social executives are more positively perceived and drive higher outcomes, as well as appear more competitive and attract more talent. As US presidential candidate, though, Hillary Clinton's found, it can also backfire if those same posts seem forced. Indeed, Clinton's struggling to attract young voters despite asking people to tell her in 3 emojis or less just what they feel about student loan debt. 3 or less. Somehow that proved an elusive quest. Well, what is the right balance? Amy Mcilwain, Global Industry Principal at Hootsuite, and Kylie Hammond, CEO of Directors Institute, with me now. Warm welcome to you. I mean, it's kind of, we got into that presidential race rather too quickly. I mean, as a context play on all of this, you think, never mind Hillary, but I mean, Trump at 3 a.m. Here we go again, and he is the kind of executive, styled candidate of the two of them. Your thoughts on this one as a recent example? Has this tarnished or indeed helped the quest of executives to push on to launch themselves into the social space?
Look, I think it's demonstrating that even at the top level with potential presidential candidates, they are using social media as a communication tool. And that can be for making them seem more human, more accessible, and they're getting their key messages across. Now, you might not like the messages, but you certainly are getting the key messages across, and you're having engagement with your followers in this case, in the US elections. And I think CEOs can take some real lessons from this as to how they should be managing their social media profile.
So just on that, before we get to the new Australia context, what lessons, Amy, would you say, from your perspective, have been laid out in this very public, social media spat between 2 leading candidates on either side there for the White House? I mean, as an example of this engagement.
Well, when it comes to social media, Hootsuite really has a unique insight into all of this. We work with 800 of the Fortune 1000 companies out there. We have 15 million users. So we're openly seeing the social media accounts of many executives that are out there in social media. And we're finding that the perception of the public wants to hear from these executives. They want to hear from the CEO. It not only drives that brand message forward, as well as builds credibility, it attracts talent, and ultimately it drives sales and influences perception.
And yet you get a sense that there's this balance to be struck between those priorities and almost jumping at shadows, and to be seen to be reactive rather than proactive. There's a fine line, is there not?
Yeah, I agree with that. But I think you've got to remember the chief executive is the chief sales officer, the chief talent officer, the ambassador for the company, and people want to hear from the chief as to how they think about different things, and they want them to commentate and to share their views. And I think there's a really good opportunity here for chief executives to become a lot more proactive than they are in Australia at the moment. They've all got a LinkedIn profile, but many of them are not proactively using it, and they're not proactively sharing their views. And maybe there's a bit of fear there that, things can get out of control very, very quickly, like we've seen with some of these, debates in the US.
Half the issue, and it comes back to leading examples in Australia, is you either have a firewall, traditionally, care of a comms department in-house that pretty much does its job and is proud of doing just that, keeping pesky, pesky individuals at bay. Whether it's from the top floor office to actually getting through directly. Why should it be any different with social media, given the demands, the day-to-day demands of running a company, the focus that's required? This would be seen as a discretionary option for many, to your point. You want to get more engaged. Convince me that it should be the core and not discretionary.
You know, social media really provides executives to step down out of those lofty ivory towers and be human. You know, businesses and people do business with those they know, like, and trust. And this is just a phenomenal opportunity for executives to really amplify, again, those brand values and be human, engage. You know, a perfect example of this is John Sutton with the Bank of Queensland. And he's out there taking photos, sharing things on Twitter. He has 30,000 followers on Twitter. First Bank of Queensland only has 8,000. This is because the individuals want to hear from the executives as really the face of the company.
Are we getting closer to working out what is the optimal usage time? You're talking about getting out there, taking photos, all the rest of it, but ultimately, perhaps too much information can backfire.
Absolutely.
You can be seen as just being almost petty and kind of just...
Yeah,
well,
you
so
don't want
what?
to just be pushing stuff out there and having no engagement on the other side. So, and there's a lot of science to the time of when you actually put out a tweet or a LinkedIn announcement and so on.
And is there, what's the consensus there, just briefly?
Well, it's different times of the day, but in the case of LinkedIn, it's towards the end of the day versus in the, you know, the early start of the day. So if you wanted to get some key messages out, people are often checking their LinkedIn profiles between 4 and 6 p.m. before they leave the office.
Day.
Yeah, in the business day.
Not midnight itself.
Yeah, well, no, you wouldn't be do 3 a.m. Trump announcements and expect to get much engagement.
Yeah.
And you certainly wouldn't do more than 3 pushes out on social media in a span of 24 hours. You wouldn't do more than that, I don't think.
Because there you have the example of, you know, from Kylie, of LinkedIn versus, say, the Twitter option. And then there are the others, you know, in line as well. What are we seeing as, you know, as being the core benefit of a Twitter posting to, say, a LinkedIn offering?
You know, it's really where you're comfortable starting. So it usually starts with getting the profiles set up and in order. So with LinkedIn, getting the right language in place, determining your personal brand. So understanding what your voice will look like on these social networks. And then determining, you know, with that messaging, where you want to get that out. Some executives might just have a LinkedIn profile and that's all. Some might progress to publishing content, sharing industry thought leadership. And then some will move on to Twitter, where they can really engage in real time with their clients, with their employees. A great example of this, there is a client of ours, he's a Fortune 500 CEO, and I had a conversation with him. He was just promoted from president to CEO, and someone said, "Congratulations, well-deserved, you're feared and revered." And he thought, he's like, I don't want to be feared. You know, this is, I need to change this perception. And he looked at social media as a way to do this, to, you know, really put out this human side of him and you know, engage with his employees, share his biking and his hobbies so he can be relatable.
What is the evidence, though, that any of that ultimately is driving customers into the front doors, in through those front doors, and loyalty from that point on? Because it's we hear on the other side of that, it's an awfully promiscuous society. I mean, you know, how many versions of the iPhone have there been? There's one every 12 months on average, just to take that. Never mind the Samsung competition, such as it is, if it hasn't exploded on you. But I mean,
look, I just take from my own example. You know, I have been, you know, I was originally very cautious about being on social media, and I've gone to the other extreme. I've got 25,000 followers on LinkedIn. They read and they are engaged with me in terms of my announcements. I've got 250,000 followers on Twitter. I generate the bulk of my revenue from that community, and it's because people feel I'm approachable. They understand what I stand for, and so people feel that they can get in touch with me. And they actually, when they get in touch with me, they know a lot about what I actually think about different things and matters in the market. So it's quite amazing what an impact it's had on our business.
what would you say the time span has been to get to that level?
Very short,
right?
Very short. I mean, it does take off. And it requires very little amount of time and effort. So it's a very, I think, a very effective communication tool, a business development tool, a human resources tool.
There was always, you touched on, you know, the photo dimension to it as well, though. There's always a sense that family are ring-fenced from day to day, that business is business, let the innocent ones be, to paraphrase. Don't bring them into this. I mean, they don't choose your career.
Yes.
It's kind of, you know, they're dragged along reluctantly or supportively, but why convince me that that is actually an optimal outcome to bring them in, whether they like it or not?
You know, it's not necessarily bringing in the family. You really want to look at defining your personal brand. So for me, for example, it would be entrepreneur, social connector, and traveler. And traveling has nothing to do with the business side of things, but it's a huge part of who I am. And it allows me to connect with people in a more authentic way. I did want to circle back to this ROI piece, though, because we did have some interesting findings in this study that Hootsuite did with LinkedIn. One of the direct impacts we found is that the more engaged executives are in social media, the more engaged their employees are. So there's a direct correlation of 42% employees are more engaged when they have social executives. And what this means is it ties back to revenue, the big number everyone's looking for, right? Well,
well, and then yet against that is the idea that do you actually go with a following of your employees? Should employees follow the boss?
Hope so.
Even to the extent that, I mean, if LinkedIn is seen as perhaps a career building exercise, why would you be wanting to muddy those waters with you know, management also in on that from in-house? That seems rather too close for comfort.
Oh, I don't think so. I think you know, to have your employees engaged, your employees are connected to a whole raft of other people in the market. You know, it's all, you know, the flow-on effect. You know, is amazing.
Okay. True believers.
Yes, we are.
We'll put you at that, both of you. Thank you so much. Kylie Haddon, CEO of the Director Institute, and Amy Mcilwain as well, the Global Industry Principal at